One of the greatest moments of my life was losing that contest and meeting my wife. That loss steered me down this road where I met her and we have these beautiful children and have this fantastic life. If I'd won the contest, that probably wouldn't have happened. Understanding that great things come from defeat as well as success. Sometimes a screw up might not be a screw up, but it might be a blessing in disguise.
Welcome to the Athlete Dad Podcast, where we explore the intersection between physical pursuits and fatherhood. I'm your host, Ben Gibson. If you're an ambitious dad that is pursuing or looking to pursue your athletic passions now while improving the way you show up at home, then we have a great show for you. Today, I had the pleasure of speaking with one of the most successful and dominant competitive longboarders in the world today, Taylor Jensen. Over the course of his surfing career, he has racked up 3 WSL World Longboard titles, 6 North American national titles, 3 Australasian national titles. He's also a 3-time US Open of Surfing longboard champion with over 50 professional career victories along the way. And most impressively, at 39, he is still at the top of his game, competing for world titles. So if you didn't know anything about surfing, just know that Taylor absolutely rips. Most importantly, Taylor is a father to 2 girls and husband to his wife, Nava. And Nava, by the way, is also an elite surfer who absolutely rips. But in this episode, we hit on all kinds of topics like how Taylor and his wife balance their kids' education with their near constant traveling around the world. Taylor takes his family on tour and they just live this incredible life where they're traveling to some of the most beautiful destinations all over the world and all surfing together. We'll talk about how Taylor's dad helped nurture his talent at a young age to set him up for success in becoming a professional surfer. Also, Taylor's competed professionally since he was 16. So we talk a lot about his keys to longevity, physically and mentally, and how that's evolved over the course of his career. I was dreaming while listening to Taylor describe the life that he has created for his family as they travel together, they surf together, and they grow together. I think this one is an important reminder that you are ultimately the architect of your own life, of your family's life, from how you live your life to where you live your life and the things that you prioritize. And it's an important reminder that if you make something a priority, it becomes a possibility. And with years of work and commitment to those priorities, man, you can live a life that's pretty damn inspiring. So please dream away with me as we listen to my amazing, wide-ranging conversation with Taylor Jensen. Awesome, Taylor. Thanks for jumping on the show today. Excited to talk with you.
Thanks for having me, man. I'm stoked.
Well, as a fellow dad, the thing I'm always curious about is like what is dad life at home for each of these athlete dads? So when it comes to you have 2 little ones at home. You know, what is the dynamic of you as dad at home right now?
Well, we have a 4-year-old and a 10-year-old, and they're both homeschooled. So the dynamic's a little bit, I like to think of it as I'm just more involved in their lives and can direct and steer them as they're growing and becoming interested in other things. It's pretty full on at times, for sure. I mean, yeah, everybody went through COVID and had their kids at home, and yeah, it can be challenging at times. But at the same time, you know, you only get so much time in their developmental periods before they move on and they're with their friends and they're doing their own thing. So the dynamic at home is just, kind of at home dad when I'm home, and then when I'm on the road, I'm on the road. But most of the time, I try and bring them with me.
Yeah. I feel like homeschooling is something that was really rare when I was a kid and seems to be really popular more and more now. Like, I'm curious, what was it for you that made you, like, were the kids ever in public school, or was it homeschool all the way through? Like, what was it for you guys?
For us, look, our eldest daughter, she did 1 year of school. And in that 1 year, she had bullying and she just wasn't excelling. She didn't gravitate towards it. She had a really hard time, wasn't learning anything. She was just unhappy. Like, and we could see it. She was changing as a person. Like, her happiness was just not there. Even when she came home, she just wasn't our happy little girl. So we decided to pull the pin, and it just made sense too with traveling.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're in a town for 4 months max at a time. You can't really, become a part of that community in a school like that. And then you're pulled out and you're across the world to a different school that has a different curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
It made things 10 times more complicated. So
Yeah.
for us, the traveling aspect really steered us towards it. And I don't know. I just also, like, I didn't have a great time at school. My wife didn't have a great time at school. We just wanted to let them learn about what they want to learn about and be more involved in their lives. Like, I don't want to drop my daughter at school and see her at the end of the day when everybody's tired and done with work, and just want to be more involved in my kids' lives, really. So that was the other aspect of it. Like, we can travel, we can be involved and see what they're interested in, and then steer them towards that, and kind of adapt their learning to whatever interests them, instead of having to learn every little bit and piece that they may not use in their life or they may not like. I'd rather focus on what they like and what they're interested in, and let them guide themselves and just kind of be there to steer them and help them in what their interests are.
Yeah. Man, I agree with that. I think especially during COVID, once we started working from home, I kind of did the mental math of, okay, if I were commuting, how much time would I actually get to spend with my son every day? And I think it was something depressing, like 45 minutes. I'm like, wow, 45 minutes
Jeez.
out of an entire day for his entire childhood. Like, there's no way that's sustainable. And I understand there's certainly people out there where it's not an option, and I definitely have the privilege of being there every day with him. But that was definitely a mental shift for us. Was like, we definitely need to be doing whatever it takes to make sure that we can physically be here every day so that we get all that extra time. Because yeah, you mentioned it, it's precious time. It goes by quickly. And I also love what you said
Totally.
about, being able to find out what they're interested in and shape that. I'm curious, what are the kids interested in, and how do you as dad find yourself kind of navigating it, nurturing that, and helping them explore it?
The thing that we really noticed with my eldest daughter going through school is that she loves science, which is a really bizarre one, because I was never like a science kid and my wife was never a science kid. So we've kind of been learning along with her
Mm-hmm.
through all these different things. And our homeschool program's great. It gives us a fund that we can spend on things for school on Amazon. Like, we can go on Amazon and buy science experiments for my daughter. They show up at the house and we do them. And that's like school for her, which is pretty rad. And to be able to, like, sit there and do a science experiment and build the volcano with your kid, which I think everybody did as a kid, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's a fond memory that I have of, like, man, I got to build a volcano and the thing erupted and the whole thing. Like, to be able to experience that with your kid, and just see that she's science, like, cool, right on, let's learn about science. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
really cool. And our youngest one's just kind of a wild child and is more interested in athletic activity, and
Mm-hmm.
and we're more interested in helping her burn energy so that we can sleep at night.
Yeah.
So it's she's 4. It's like she's at that age where she's starting to want to do what sister's doing. Like, sister's doing a science experiment, so we'll get her like a smaller version of that science experiment,
Mm-hmm.
and she can play along. And music's now become a thing with my daughter. She loves singing, and now she's learning to play the guitar. It's like, I wish I would have learned to play the guitar growing up, but because I was in a school environment and that wasn't an option at my school, I never learned. And I didn't have anybody in the house who played music, and it just didn't have the opportunity. So it's cool that we can see, hey, she likes music, she likes science. Let's get her guitar lessons and singing lessons, and let's do science experiments with her and take her to the Science Museum in San Diego. And,
Mm-hmm.
just, just kind of expose her to things that she can learn from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that interest-based learning is huge. And like, even something as cool as you mentioned of like, yeah, let's get the science experiment and let's do this at the kitchen table, or let's pop down to the museum and let's go do this ourselves. And one, I think it's certainly probably a higher quality of education than what most public schools can offer. But two, you get to be along the ride with them, and that's such a unique experience. I hear you about the 4-year-old. I have a 4-year-old son, or almost 4-year-old, and I don't know if I'm helping him burn energy as much as I'm helping him just get better stamina, because he just seems to just get more and more endurance. But I also think of that as like, I want to be able to do this. 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 I want to be I don't know how he would do in a traditional classroom, like
Mm,
sitting down all day and having to wait to raise his hand to, be let to go to the bathroom. He's in an all outdoor preschool at the moment, a couple days a week, and I'm like, yeah, that's what he needs. He just needs like
yeah,
a field, some forest, some rocks and mud, and he's running around and learning more than, I think he probably would learn in a traditional setting. So yeah, that's
yeah,
really cool.
exactly. Well, you got to figure we're all different, right? Like everybody is different. We can't all be funneled into one system that's going to work for everybody. It just doesn't work. Like
Mm-hmm.
some kids don't need school. Some kids need a different sort of learning. My daughter needs more one-on-one than in a
Mm-hmm.
classroom. She's too easily distracted, loses interest, and then just, and then gets called out for not paying attention or whatever it may be. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, you need one-on-one. You need no distractions in a house, no TVs on, no other kids raising their hands or making funny jokes and fart sounds and whatever else goes on in classrooms. She just needs that one-on-one, and it's cool that we could see that and yeah, dial her in for it.
Yeah, and even things like that might be viewed at in traditional schools as negatives. Sort of maybe fierce independence, a little bit of like questioning authority, rebelliousness, and inability to sit still. Like things that we know will probably serve them later in life might not be rewarded as much in that traditional setting, and they might lose a little bit of that. And that's, I think, the biggest thing I've realized as a parent is like this fear of like, I don't want you to lose your shine because of me or because of the world. Like, I want you to shine as brightly as who you are as you possibly can. And I think that probably is a lot of the conversations that people are having around school, homeschool. How do we approach this, generally? But yeah, cool to see that you guys have really leaned into that homeschool approach. And you mentioned traveling quite a bit. So you're currently in Australia. You split time between California. Tell me about like how does that work for the family for all that travel?
It's look, we've been doing it since before the kids were ever thought of or born. So they've just they don't know any different, right? Like we
Mm-hmm.
don't stay anywhere for a prolonged period of time. I think the most amount of time we've ever spent in one place was during COVID,
Mm-hmm.
which was for like 11 months because we couldn't travel and we were stuck. So for us, we're just constantly wheels turning, always moving. Like, yeah, we're in Australia now. We were in Bali for 2 months, the last 2 months. Like we're going. We like to travel. It's also a part of what we want our kids to experience growing up. It's a part of that schooling. It's when we take them places like Bali, they learned all about the cultures.
Hmm.
They learned about Nimpi, which is the Day of Silence in Bali when we were there. They learned about the Ogo Ogo statues and what it is and why they're silent and how they scare away bad spirits. And, like there's so many other cultures and religions and different ways that people live that for me and my wife, we really want our kids to understand that there's no
Mm-hmm.
one way of living. There's no one religion. Everybody has their own beliefs and their own way of doing things. And it's important to learn about that, have some sort of a vague understanding of why it is that they believe that and they do certain things, and then to just respect it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that for them, it's allowing them to see the way that other people live and have an appreciation for the way that we live and living in first world countries and having food on the table and a roof over our head. And, we go to some pretty sketchy places traveling for surf, like remote islands are kind of generally better, less crowded waves.
Mm-hmm.
So we go to places like that and they see people living in shacks and kids that don't have toys, and they appreciate coming home and having their toys and a TV and whatever it may be. It just gives them a better appreciation, I think, for life and the life that we live and how lucky they really are.
Oh yeah. And it's so hard to impart those lessons without travel. Like I didn't ever really travel growing up, and so I really leaned into it as much as I could as a young adult. And yeah, like you said, some of those experiences, especially in pretty sketchy places, really gave me a lot of like empathy and perspective. You've probably surfed Nicaragua. My wife and we flew into Nicaragua at like 11 p.m. at night, and our plan was like we were just very naively gonna like just sleep in Managua airport, and then in the morning we'll catch a taxi cab up to Leon. And this woman on the plane like heard our plans, and she's like, you cannot sleep in the Managua airport. Like, it is very, very unsafe. You must stay at my house. And first off, just the generosity of some stranger that this woman was like, yeah, sure, you come to my house. But this woman's house, like, you could tell that like they built it from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the morning they fed us breakfast, and it was just this unbelievable generosity and kindness towards complete strangers to go out of their way for that. And like that's a moment that impacted my life forever, and certainly something that I want my kids to experience to some degree, like you mentioned, like that appreciation of how things are different, that respect for other cultures. And I don't know how you do that without travel.
No, it definitely makes it easier to just opening that conversation, right? Like, how do you even approach the subject without them seeing it? Like,
Mm-hmm.
they wouldn't have any understanding of what other people live like, and living in a shack that has no power or no water, or it's wild even for us. Like, even as
Mm-hmm.
adults, it's a crazy thought that people do live like that. Like,
Yeah.
growing up in a Western world, it's like, wow, man, people really do like that's reality for them. So yeah, it definitely opens up that subject and makes it a little bit easier to talk about with the kids once they've seen it. And they see how happy the other kids are,
Mm-hmm.
even though they have nothing. Like, these kids are smiling and playing with sticks and coconuts and happy to play with them as well. Like, even though the language barriers, they don't understand anything the other one's saying, but
Mm-hmm.
they can still play with a coconut and a stick and have a blast and think it's great and find hermit crabs, and like, they figure it out. So it's just really cool that they start to understand that we don't need to speak the same language. We don't need to have the same values or belief systems. We can still get along and have fun and make friends with people that we know nothing about and have nothing in common with. But that friendship can still exist, which is cool. I think growing up, like, you learn to not judge people so much.
Sure.
I think,
Man.
and just have a respect for people who don't have as much. It's not like, oh, they're poor. It's like, hey, man, they're a happy kid too. Rad. Like, let's play. Yeah, we're just trying to. It's all about just trying to find that balance, right? And every different, like, traveling helps. I think
Mm-hmm.
you're exposed to it more and you see it more, and obviously having two different kind of homes, one in Australia and one in California, and coming and going from those, and kind of pulling out and pulling back in, and being involved and then seeing it from a distance and then back involved. It helps you kind of understand what's going on, and yeah, it gives you a better perspective, right? It's just a little bit easier to see when you step out of it and then step back into it.
Yeah, definitely. Taylor, I just want to step back a bit and talk about your start in surfing, because this being a podcast about dads, I believe you got started surfing, around age 6 from your own dad. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. My dad was a big beach volleyball guy,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's kind of, I was at the beach a lot, and he kind of exposed me to surfing. And I grew up in this really small town in Coronado, California, which doesn't have great surf by any means. I might as well have been born in Florida. Like, there's not much there, right? But as a kid, it's perfect. Tiny little waves all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So he kind of exposed me to boogie boarding first, and I had a bodyboard that had little fins on it. 80s bodyboard. They used to have these little plastic fins on them, and I was small enough at that time at 6 that I could stand up on that. And so that's what kind of exposed me to surfing. And then my dad was the manager of the Chart House in Coronado, California, growing up. So the Chart House community is very surf centric, and ski centric. Like, there's a whole lot of that stuff going on. So everybody within the business, their kids always surfed. So I was hanging out with these other kids who my dad worked with, and then we surfed. That was it.
Do you feel like there was something your dad did to nurture your passion for surfing? Anything that you think really helped make it to where you were able to start excelling right away?
Oh, for sure. My dad helped implement a lot of things that guided me towards a professional surfing kind of career, I guess. As much as he always wanted me to have a backup plan and play team sports and do other things, he helped implement, like, he helped start the surf team at my school. So growing up, we didn't, like, surfing was kind of I don't know what you'd say, but yeah, it wasn't a super popular sport in my town. It was more basketball and baseball and football and, that sort of stuff. So he got together with a guy named John Gillum, who is basically my coach growing up as a kid. And they started the Coronado surf team. So then we were doing competitions, doing surf PE in the mornings, training, going to surf, going up and down the California coast to these surf events. And that really is where I started to get a taste of what I wanted to do in this traveling, competing, making friends from all these different places and surfing together. That was like the biggest probably thing looking back. And I never really thought about it till now, with like that, the fact that my dad went out and started that surf team with John is probably the biggest thing that fed my career.
Yeah. Dude, that's awesome that he saw that opportunity and just got right on it. Like how many people would have just been like, "Oh man, that sucks. There's no surf team here." Well, I guess on to baseball season, but he saw that and really made the most of it. I mean, dude, I remember the first time I saw surf PE, which as a concept is like so foreign to I think 99% of the world. I remember being at Tamarack in Carlsbad and seeing surf PE, and it was so obvious. Like, of course you would have this
Yeah.
team, but also just so cool as a concept of like, oh yeah, third period, I have surf. Like,
Yeah.
that is just
Pretty
such
crazy,
a cool.
right? Like, yeah, we didn't have it like for the first few years I was in like junior high school. We didn't have it, but all the surrounding schools did.
Mhm.
And I was like, I was hassling the principal, doing anything that I could. I was like, why don't we have surf PE? Like, this is ridiculous. Like, I'm doing it anyways in the morning. Like, I'm going for a surf before school starts, but we should be embracing this because it's a great way for us to start the day. And, a lot of these surf kids, if they get their surf out, they'll probably pay more attention in school. And, it's going to help the flow of everything with us. So, it was really cool of my dad to step in and kind of see that. And also just see that, like, my dad was a really athletic guy, but as in like track and field, football, team sports, that was his thing. So for him to, even though he really made me do a lot of team sports that I probably didn't want to do, for him to see that surfing was a thing and for him to start that surf team and stuff, it was a big push from him. I can see that now looking back.
And you hit on something that I think is something I've always found really interesting about people. There's sometimes this stereotype of the surfer, of them being lazy, the Spicoli, and
the dropouts. Yeah.
right. But what I always found interesting is that, if there was good swell at 5 a.m., 6 a.m., and it called for some dawn patrol, there was nothing stopping people from getting out in frigid cold waters when the sun is just cracking the horizon. And I always found that interesting too, against thinking of it like as a dad. It's like, wow, we really, if people are given the right opportunity to find their passion and they find that thing, people can really, make the most of that situation for themselves. And that was a dynamic of surfers where I was like, I don't know, dude, like they're probably up in the morning before most people, and they may not have slept all that much last night. Like that to me is a pretty motivated, committed individual.
Absolutely. And there's a level of dedication that comes with the addiction that surfing is, that you're happy to get up in the dark and be standing on the freezing. Even my daughter this morning, she's 10 and we're at the beach at 6:30 and she's paddling out and it's freezing cold, but she loves it. So she's out there with her friends. And it definitely imparts that dedication in your life. Like, you understand the commitment that it takes to be a surfer. And when you're going to school all day, if you want to surf, you got to wake up at 5:30, 6 in the morning and be at the beach and get your surf in before, because you're not going to get it, especially in wintertime when it gets dark early. You're not getting an after school surf. So if you want to be a surfer, you better get up and get out there early and be cold and deal with the cold and deal with all the factors. But at least you're getting your surf in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the thing that I'm really interested in is not just that first generation dynamic of, what your dad did really well, but also how you think about carrying those things that he did well on to your own kids, and how you show up as your own dad. Like, what are things that you feel like your dad did really well, surfing related or not, that you really want to still impart on your own kids? And where are some avenues where you might want to do things a little differently, maybe your own style?
Yeah, I mean, like, I always think a lot about like breaking the chain when it comes to the negative things that may be there in your life. My dad was a really dedicated worker. Like, he was the manager of a big restaurant, and that meant 7 a.m. mornings, come home at lunchtime for an hour break, go back to work at 2 or 3 o'clock, and work till 10. That was his schedule. So a lot of the time, I felt like maybe my dad wasn't there on school days and during the week. He had Sundays and Mondays off, so I would see him on Sunday, and then I was in school on Monday. So
Mm-hmm.
it was a, yeah, I wanted to break that chain with my kids. I don't want to work like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've made that very like a adamant thing. I'm not going to work like that. Like, I don't care what I have to do, entrepreneurial, investment, whatever I can do to not have to work those hours, I'm going to do, and be there for my kids for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But in saying that, at the same time, on the good side, my dad was always there for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when it came to taking off time from work to take me to a contest, or to wake up at 5 a.m. to drive me up the coast to some event in the middle of nowhere. I lose first heat and turn around and have to drive me all the way back home while I slept in the passenger seat. Totally ungrateful, like, just not even realizing what it was that he's doing at the time. I just, yeah, I want to go to surf contest. So dad's driving me to surf contest. I didn't like appreciate it at the time,
Mm-hmm.
but I want to make sure that I'm always there for my kids in that respect. And that if it's something that they're genuinely interested in or something that they want to do, regardless of whether or not I see value in it or I think that they should be doing it. If it's something that they want to do, I just want to make sure that I'm there, and I'm driving, and I'm behind the wheel, and I'm ready to go, no matter how tired or what 30-hour flight I just got off and I just got home. Like, I want to be there for my kids.
That power of just physically showing up. Like, I think something I've really learned from a lot of these conversations on the podcast is that most dads feel this pressure to feel like they have to show up in this heroic way, to have these really profound moments where they go above and beyond. And what it is funny about that is that most of the time, especially when we reflect on our own relationship with our own dads, most of the time, the most important thing is just showing up and nailing all the little things. And I think even if somebody is struggling, it's like, man, if they just are physically there for their kids, for their family, that makes up for most things, I think. And my dad was the same way, where I was totally that ungrateful kid in the car as my dad's driving us 6 hours to a wrestling tournament for me to lose 2 matches and wrestle for 6 minutes and then just drive all the way home. And I'm just annoyed that we don't get to stop for McDonald's on the way home. And
Yeah,
it's so funny that now as an adult, I can fully appreciate, man, what it actually took just to physically show up and how important that is. Like, yeah, that seems to be like a really, really big one, is just physically be there for the kids.
totally. And like you said, it's those little things too that when you look back as an adult and having your own kids, you really start to understand what it takes to have kids and what your parents went through to get you to be the adult that you are now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's crazy. Like, it's such hard work, and there's times where it just seems like you're swimming upstream, and it's a nightmare. And our kids go through different phases, and it can be super rough. So just being there for them, and trying to understand, and not like trying to just have the patience
Mm-hmm.
to let them come to their own understandings and get through things on their own, but also be present and be available should they need you. Like, that's, yeah, it's important. And it's not always easy, but
Yeah.
I do think that showing up, even just for the little things, is crucial.
You mentioned that, you made a commitment pretty early on that you wanted to physically be there for the kids. You see it reflected in the decision for homeschooling and traveling and all these things. And I think in a lot of ways, whether you're an entrepreneur or an athlete like yourself, it comes with its own unique challenges to logistically make that work, like between training and traveling for tours and contests. Like, how do you manage the schedule so that it gives you that time to be present with the kids?
I mean, look, the homeschool thing helps a big piece of that, because
Mm-hmm.
they're here, during the day, and I'm here during the day. Yeah, a lot of it's just, uh, I don't know, just pushing through and just
Mm-hmm.
making it happen, not being too tired, not saying, oh, dad's tired, I had a big training day, or I surfed too much, or, not coming up with excuses and things when your kids need you or want you, or whatever it may be. I think that kids really feel your love the most when you're just with them, playing with them.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of that's a kid's love language, right? Is play. They want to play. So I think if you just make the time to play each day, and surf schedule is pretty simple. Like it's not, I'm not an Olympian. I'm not away at the, training at some crazy training center or whatever it may be. Like I'm out in the water surfing, or I'm training in the garage, or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
may be. I'm not, I don't have that crazy critical schedule that I have to
Mm-hmm.
keep every day. A lot of it's dependent on surf. And if the surf's no good, then I've got a lot of time for the kids. And then when the surf's good, I'm out in the water and the wind comes up. Well, then I come back and I'm with the kids. It's,
Mm-hmm.
I'm lucky to have that really flexible schedule, but at the same time, it is just making that investment of, hey, I'm going to be there. Like if this is on, it doesn't matter if the waves are good, or, I'm going to fly back as soon as I lose a contest, or I'm just going to make every effort to be there every minute that I can.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, yeah, making sure that I'm getting what I need to get done in order to perform at my best, so that I can continue this lifestyle and have this schedule that I can be with my kids, right? Because if I
Mm-hmm.
start losing contests and I start not being able to compete at the highest level and my career starts suffering, then I'm going to have to start looking at other options and things financially to make an income. And then that's going to take time away from my kids. So
Mm-hmm.
just trying to find that balance of it all. And yeah, it's not easy,
Yeah.
but you make it work.
I can't help but feel this sense of fluidity in the way that you approach it. And I imagine that much of your life has been influenced by surfing, and that because of that, much of that of those lessons in surfing, of how you've navigated the world with surfing, has come into your daily life. Like how much has surf influenced the way you show up as a dad and as a husband? Like how have those things been changed because you've chosen this life?
My whole life, like from meeting my wife to having kids, everything, it's all because of surfing. Like I met my wife at a surf contest and we both lost. Like, like funny thing, like I lost a contest, but I won a wife. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of a crazy, it's just weird the way that surfing's kind of steered my life. I was having a lot of fun when I first got on tour, and I was losing a lot. Um, and then I met my wife, and I took things a little bit more serious, but still had fun and traveled together with her. And all of a sudden, I started winning, and just my life just got better because I think I had more purpose behind it with
Mm-hmm.
having someone who I knew that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with and wanted to have a family with, and it it helped me find a balance, I think. And I think that understanding that, life comes in waves, and sometimes you have to ride the waves, and sometimes you have to go under the waves, and sometimes the waves hold you down. And, there's a lot of similarities between surfing and life and the waves that come. And, just understanding that the wave will pass, and tomorrow there'll be another wave. I mean, it goes with everything in life. And it's something that's really kept me, given me good perspective on things, right? It's like, it's going to pass. The moment's going to pass, whether it's today and it's a good moment and like I won a world title, but if in that moment I'm still thinking, man, this doesn't last forever,
Mm-hmm.
like that'll disappear. And then what happens, like appreciate it now because you're in this moment, but then there's going to be another moment, and that moment might be
Mm-hmm.
bad. And then, well, it's going to pass. You'll be okay. And then, you just kind of work through life like that. And it's helped me find the balance of remaining sane, I guess,
Sure.
in things with kids. And like kids go through different phases, and sometimes it's gnarly. My youngest daughter was going through just, I don't know, acting out. I don't know what's going on. Maybe she's getting a cold, maybe something coming, but
Mm-hmm.
just trying to realize that that's going to pass. Like
Yeah.
she was really gnarly the last couple of days, and it was driving me and my wife and our other daughter crazy. But it'll pass, and it's just a phase, and you got to remember that. And they're kids, and that something's going on, whether they're trying to articulate something and they don't have the words for it, or they're not feeling well, or whatever it may be. Like it's a phase, and it'll pass. So yeah, I think
Mm-hmm.
surfing's just really brought that balance to me, to understand that things come and go, and yeah, you just got to keep moving.
Sure. Yeah. And those moments where, yeah, especially when the kids they're in a phase that's so challenging. And I notice in parenting, it's like when I'm in that mode of resistance, I'm trying to like impose my will to push through and force through in opposition of the wave that's coming at me. I'm totally out of sync, and it's not good for anyone. And it's definitely in those moments where I'm much more present, calm, receptive, and receiving of like what's coming, and how can I just kind of navigate this with ease, and to your point, know that good or bad, it's going to pass. We're going to get through it. Things are going to improve. Things are going to get different. And yeah, man, I think that there's a lot of really powerful like life perspective, life lessons that you can learn from being in the water. I think too, it's obviously an important part of your life and like who you are as a person. You know, I'm a climber. When I was in San Diego, I was in the water every day, and I never thought I wasn't even interested in hiking. And now mountains have become this life obsession of mine. And I've moved my family to Oregon so that we could be at the mountains. But I think a big part of why it's so important is that I always say that the person that goes up the mountain is not the same person that comes down the mountain. Tell me about, how does the person change for you, that person that goes out in the water versus the person that comes back to shore? Like how is surfing changed you, or why is it so important for you?
Surfing, it's my release. It's how I cope. It really has become a coping mechanism for me. It's I'll go into the water stressed out and frustrated or whatever it may be, whether it's family, work, whatever, and I'll go into the water and it all disappears.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't necessarily matter how good the waves are or if I get good waves or not. It's just a place of serenity for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's quiet. It's silence. It's the only place where I can actually think without getting distracted. Like I have ADHD, so for me, I get distracted super easily, right? But in the water, there is no distractions for me. I'm scanning the lineup, looking for waves. It's the only time I feel like my brain is silent and not just ticking crazy, just ticking constant ideas or thoughts through. I'm in the ocean and I'm thinking about the waves, and that's it. And it's just like you see on Instagram, there's like memes and stuff where there's all this noise and then they pick up whatever it is that they like to do and it goes silent.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, why they do this. It's like, it's a real thing for me. Like I'm constantly head noise going on. And then I get in the water and the head noise is gone.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I'll go into the ocean as a stressed out dad and come back and build sandcastles on the beach happily. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's
Totally.
really indicative of what it does for me. Like if I'm sitting on the beach and I haven't had a surf yet, I'm not as eager to build sandcastles and, do that stuff. I'm like looking at the ocean, like, oh man, I should be out there. I need to, and then, but if I've had my surf, I'm like zenned out, balanced, and I can come back into shore and do those things and
Mm-hmm.
be much more present for my family.
That's great. Yeah, it's like peak dad post surf. Like if you need to ask
Totally.
dad for a raise of allowance, hit him up post surf because he'll be in the
Yeah.
best mood.
Oh, my kids know too. They know, like, don't ask dad before he's had a coffee and a surf. Like, just let that go through first, and then and then we can try and get in dads. And they've got me wrapped around their little fingers anyway, so
Yeah,
they know they know how to get me.
that's cool. Yeah, it certainly it certainly changes, becoming the dad. But you mentioned your kids are surfing. Is that
Yep.
something you guys all get to do together?
Yeah, it's really cool. So my wife surfs as well. She was on the world tour, Australian longboard champion.
Mm-hmm.
So she's we both surf,
Mm-hmm.
and both of our kids surf, and her her whole family surfs basically, other than her mom. So
Hmm.
we're out there with granddad, uncle, mom, dad, all surfing together. And it's just a
That's
really special, like such a special thing to share. Like just these, most of our days involve walking down to the beach from our house here in Australia, surfing this little baby wave in the corner that's just, you couldn't build a more perfect wave for a 4 and a 10-year-old.
mm-hmm.
And go down there, and grandma and granddad come down, and uncle comes down and watch on the beach and play on the beach and surf for a couple hours. And that's like a daily activity for us. That's like recess for the kids, like that's like, what a special thing to be able to grow up doing that.
I don't know of anything else that's like that. Like there are no other sports that I can think of, or I guess few other sports that are like that. But man, that is such a special opportunity for the grandparents to get into the mix too. I mean, that gets them time with the grandkids and gives them that it's not like you're visiting grandma once a year, but it's like, man, that daily quality time with the whole family. That is so special.
Totally. And they live like they're 3 doors up. So the kids can run up there and, hey, we're gonna go surf, let's go, and then they'll come down, and it's just it's so special. Like I didn't
Hmm.
grow up with that in San Diego, like it just, grandparents lived further up the coast or whatever it may be, and or they
Hmm.
weren't beach people, they didn't surf, like that. I just didn't grow up with that, where my wife did. Like her dad's always been there surfing, and her
Hmm.
grandparents, she's they lived on the beach. So um, yeah, it was something that I really thought was really cool when we had kids and started seeing this whole dynamic form. And my 4-year-old the other day paddled out to the point, which is a bit of a bigger, heavier wave, with uncle
Hmm.
and on his big 12-foot board, and caught a wave with him. And it was cool just to sit back on the beach and watch that.
Hmm.
Like it's great to be a part of it and to be dad on the board with my kids. And
Yeah.
I've done a lot of that, but it's also really cool to be able to just kind of take a step back and watch somebody else take your kid for that experience too, and see the
Uh,
smile on their face and your kid's face. And yeah, just to be able to step back a little bit, you appreciate
yeah.
it more.
Totally. I mean, I love seeing my parents do anything with my kids, and it's just like almost surreal too. We're like, wow, this is so cool to just watch them get to share that moment, but to get to see them do something that you also love, that's got to be really special.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty special for sure.
That, that's awesome. I am curious too, as someone who has surfed their entire life, and also I think you said you won your first pro contest at what, 16? Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I
you've
was
been
16.
you've been surfing at a high level for an enormous amount of time. So I am curious about longevity. And I think that this is something that comes up with a lot of dads too. I think I was just talking with some dads of friends of mine here that ski, and literally every time we get off the mountain, it's just aches and pains. And it's like how many more years of this do I have? But you seem to have maybe cracked a code when it comes to physical and mental longevity. And it's not been without injuries. I think you said you broke your back in your late teens. I know you've had some pretty significant, ankle injuries, but I'm curious, like, what do you think you've done right? And maybe it's changed over the course of your career. What do you think you've done right physically to give yourself the longevity to continue to compete at such a high level for so long?
Um, it's a funny one because I feel the aches and pains too. I think surfing's not a super high impact sport,
Hmm.
which I think definitely helps. Also, just the right balance of training. Like I don't overtrain. I'm not in the gym hitting weights and stuff like that. Like
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that benefits you surfing personally.
Hmm.
Especially longboarding. Like I ride a longer board, so it's not so much about brute strength and aerial maneuvers and extreme sports. A lot of it's about finesse and little intricacies and details and footwork and being nimble and light on your feet. So
Hmm.
for me, my training has been less impact and more just fluidity, balance oriented.
Hmm.
And I think that that's really where the longevity comes into play. Like if you can stay like loose and light on your feet, there's no time limit for longboarding. Like really, like we had Joel Tudor won a world title. I think he's 46.
Hmm.
Like that's Kelly Slater just won at 50 at Pipeline. It wasn't a world title, but it was probably one of the most highly respected events in the world.
Sure.
Surfing definitely has a longer lifespan
Hmm.
if you just stay on top of your game and continue doing things. Like
Hmm.
you just have to stay on top of it. And I think that the kids are definitely keeping me young as well.
Hmm.
Them surfing more, and I want to win another world title with my kids being able to watch me do that. Like
Yeah.
my eldest daughter saw that. Like she got to see me win my third world title, which was a really special moment for me, right? But my youngest one hasn't seen that, and I want to give her that same experience.
Hmm.
So it's a little bit selfish of me. Hey, I want to, be dad on the podium and have them on the podium with me when I win a world title. Like what a rad experience, right?
Yeah.
And seeing Joel do it a couple years ago with his kids, and I've watched his kids grow up. Like I remember when his kids were born, so
Hmm.
I've watched them grow up, and they're in their teens, and they're competing on the world tour now. Like just see him win in front of his teenage kid, pretty
Yeah.
rad. Like that's a pretty rad moment. Like
Yeah.
how cool. So I
Yeah.
just want to find that balance, get my kids. I don't know, it's not easy. Like there's ailments and stuff with my back flares up from time to time, my knee
Hmm.
flares up, my ankle flares up. It's like I just have to find the right balance of overdoing it and not doing enough.
Hmm.
Because if I overdo it, things will start to hurt, and I really notice them now. But I just don't do those things that make it
Mm-hmm.
hurt. And I just try to, evolve and adapt and change and
Yeah.
just stay on top of my game, but without overcooking myself.
Yeah. And that would be a rad experience as a dad to be at the top of the podium, have your kids witness that. And I don't know if it's as much selfish as much as I always think of it as like you're really modeling your kids like, hey, this is how I think you should navigate the world. Like you should go after your passions. Should pursue them diligently for as long as you can. You can accomplish anything you put your mind to, despite the challenges. So sure, there may be a little of selfishness in there, of like, yeah, dad still got it, but I definitely think that there's a lot rooted in modeling that ambition for how we think our kids should navigate the world.
Oh, for sure. I mean, my kids just see me day to day, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
because they're homeschooled, they see what I do day to day in preparation for events and stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
for them to see that dad's like, I'm going for it, but there's no guarantee.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I might lose. I might put in all this effort, all this time, all this money and lose. And that's
Mm-hmm.
okay. Like, it's also helping them understand loss, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can prepare as much as you want and you can think you're on top of your game, and then the wave doesn't come, or the ocean doesn't cooperate, or the judges don't give you the score, or whatever it may be. And, you have to learn how to accept defeat. And for them to be able to see that, like they've seen a lot of that, you lose way more than you
Mm-hmm.
win. So for them to see that, and to see that rather than me taking that in and being down and negative and, like beating myself up about a loss, that I can turn that loss into fire, into fuel for the fire moving forward. And I can
Mm-hmm.
just say, okay, I need to work better at this. And then I'll just go all in and work better. Like, I went all in at surfing at 13. 13, I got my first sponsor, and that was it. I was going to be a professional surfer. I didn't care what happened.
Hmm.
I stopped paying attention in school. I just lost interest in sports. Like, that was it. I was all in. No backup
Hmm.
plan. I don't want to teach my kids that, because that's probably a little bit of a risky maneuver. But when you have nothing else and that's your only plan, a lot of you'll put a lot more into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So there is definitely,
absolutely.
there's something there, that not having a backup. Like, my dad really wanted me to go to college and have a backup plan, and I wasn't doing it. Like, I didn't care. I wasn't listening. I was a stubborn,
Mm-hmm.
little bit cocky kid who just got his first sponsor, and I'm going to be a professional surfer, and I'm going to win a world title, and da 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 da. Like, I probably should have listened, but at the same time, if I did listen and I did go to school, I don't know that I'd be where I am now.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think, man, having what you said about having them witness you lose and fail despite preparation. I mean, seeing your dad lose or fail as a kid is kind of a shocking thing, but what a helpful moment for them to get to see you navigate that, because I think a lot of people probably struggle with that themselves because they never witnessed it. They're like, dude, I don't know how to handle losing because I never saw somebody model losing well and turning it into something positive. I don't know how to handle conflict because I never saw anyone handle conflict well and show me how to do it. So I bet the times where they've witnessed things not go well are probably some of the more impactful moments for them. Like that's huge.
Yeah, for sure. And they interpreted it funny too. Like, I lost a world title, really close world title. My daughter was on the beach, and she came up and she's like, "Dad, I want to go kick his butt." I just like, I'm all like bummed out because I just lost, and she comes up and says that, and I just start cracking up. I'm like, it immediately took me out of that. Oh man, I just lost a world title by
Yeah.
0.03 or whatever it was, to like,
Uh,
oh, how great are kids? Like, it's just really
dude,
cool.
it's just a reminder that like no matter what cool shit you get into, you're just dad. Like you're just cool because you're dad, and like
Yeah.
you could win 11 world titles or none, and they still love you. And that's, I think, something I'm trying to remind myself of as I head into a big climb. And it's like, man, most important thing is that I come home and I just show up as dad again, and everything will be right in the world.
That's it. It's really hard to shelf that coming home, right? Walking in the door, and hang up those emotions on the rack,
Mm-hmm.
like, with your hat and your jacket. Like, it's really hard. Like, it's a really hard thing. You're emotionally invested in what you do as an athlete, and to put those emotions aside and, come in the door and be 100% dad it's really hard, man. Like, there's
Mm-hmm.
days where I just can't do it, and I feel bad, and I feel like I'm blowing it as a dad, but
Mm-hmm.
you know, you got to take care of yourself too. And there's some things that you can't shake for a reason, and you need to process emotionally and before you can be dad again. Right. So nobody's
Yeah.
perfect. You just got to kind of push through and yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Just make it work for you. Whatever you got to do, you got to do.
Certainly. Yeah, man. I mean, that was the whole genesis of why this podcast even exists, was because I felt like I was massively underperforming in certain areas as a dad. And it was like, man, I am coming to this with zero answers and a million questions because, you know, I certainly want to keep pushing through. And I think it's conversations like this that, like, I think more men, more dads, like having this realness of like, man, I think I'm messing this up quite a bit, and I'm trying to figure this out and trying to navigate the ambiguity and the uncertainty, and most importantly work on my own stuff to show up. But it's certainly not an easy endeavor at all. So
Dad
yeah.
life's gnarly, you know. It really is. I mean, I really value conversations like this, right? Like
Yeah.
hearing other people's take. Like a lot of the things I follow on Instagram and stuff like that, it's people talking about being a dad, and that but in reality, like not some expectations, just this is real dad life. Like I screwed up
Yeah.
today, and that's okay. Like
Yeah.
you know, like things slip, you make mistakes. That's being a dad. Like that's being human. That's who
Mm-hmm.
we are. Like we're going to make mistakes, and you just have to show up and do the absolute best that you can in the moment and learn from mistakes and move on to the next moment and just try to do better the next time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very well said. I think a lot of what you said of like continuing to push through and continuing to, you know, process where we fail and whatnot is probably a lot of that mental longevity that I think is so critical to your career. Like, one, you've chosen a career that was your passion, and I think it's probably sometimes probably hard to, and again, I don't know, but like maybe to have surfing not feel like a job, not feel like work, but also the idea to continue to compete year after year. And as you mentioned, with some pretty kind of devastating losses that were just like, you know, fractions of points that were the difference between winning and losing. Like, how do you think about the mental game of longevity and how that's maybe evolved since you were that 13-year-old kid that was maybe a little arrogant to the man you are now?
Like early on in my career, I took the losses really personal, right? And I'd
Mm-hmm.
smash my equipment and I'd freak out and I'd like be so angry and so frustrated that
Mm-hmm.
I would just blow out. And I started to notice this toll that it was taking on me. Like I spent my first 11 years on tour without a world title. 11 years of doing the same thing, losing, like having to cope with losses like that, like close losses, like runner ups, thirds, fifths. Like I've
Mm-hmm.
been in the top 10 my whole career, but I spent 11 years in the top 10 without a world title. Like that's pretty gnarly stuff to try and like figure out in your head. Like, what am I doing wrong? Why aren't I getting these results? I'm doing all the
Mm-hmm.
work. Where's the result? You know, you're brought up to believe that you do the work, you get the result. And that's often not the case with competition, because especially surfing, because it's not a level playing field. Waves come, waves don't come.
Mm-hmm.
You just don't know. So I read a book, and I can't remember the name of the book right now, but one of the messages in the book was to take time to acknowledge your moments of greatness as well as your moments of defeat and learn from them. Right. So I think as human beings, we notice our faults a lot quicker than we notice our strengths. And just to kind of like, I started stepping back and being like, hey, you know what? I surfed that heat really well. I did these things right. And it gave me a little bit of positivity within these negative results to keep myself going. Right. If you're just bombarded with negativity, you're going to burn out and you're going to be over it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just going to happen. You're not going to want to do it anymore. So even though you're losing, and even though you're not getting the results that you want, and all these goals and dreams are passing you by, you can still acknowledge the fact that you did something good in there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important, like as a dad also, like, you know, you have these moments of, wow, I screwed up. You know, you notice when you screwed up,
Mm-hmm.
but you're not acknowledging the fact that, hey, as parents, we handled this situation really well today. Like, stop and give your partner a high five, or, you know, a hug or whatever it is, and say, you know, we did really well with that. Like, I'm really happy with the way that we communicated with our children over this topic.
Mm-hmm.
And even though it's one topic of a day that maybe it was a nightmare and things fell apart and you felt like you were losing, that one moment is something that you need to keep in perspective, that it's not all bad. There are goods in here. We're doing our best. Let's keep moving forward. Same thing in surfing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not all bad. I lost the contest, but maybe I was working on something in there, some competitive strategy, and I got it and that worked.
Mm-hmm.
So cool, acknowledge it. Like, don't just skip over it like it's a nothing. Like, it is a significant event, even though it didn't
Mm-hmm.
get you the result that you wanted.
That is that's a great piece of advice there in that moment of struggle, to acknowledge your partner. Because I think, yeah, that's something as you said it, I was like, man, I certainly don't do that. I think I'm quick to criticism when things are not going well. And there's really not a lot of praise in those moments where I'm like, hey, I really loved how you handled that conversation. I really loved how you kept your cool, even though they were kicking and screaming. That's a great piece of advice, and it seems like it's definitely served you well. The focus on optimism, and I'm still blown away by the fact that you lost that contest and then met your wife. Like, what there's no better example of like silver lining in a down moment than that. Is like, well, shoot, had I surfed well, I may not have actually met my wife and
No,
had my family.
totally.
So
Totally. And that maybe that's what kind of kick-started that whole optimistic thing in my head. Like, maybe,
mm-hmm.
one of the greatest moments of my life was losing that contest and meeting my wife. And that loss steered me down this road where I met her, and we have these beautiful children and have this fantastic life that, like, if I'd won the contest, that probably wouldn't have happened, because I wouldn't have gone out that night and I would have been preparing, for the next day of competition. Like,
Yeah.
so yeah, like, understanding that great things come from defeat as well as success. Like, that's, this, yeah, sometimes a screw up might not be a screw up, might be a blessing in disguise.
Absolutely. And it has certainly led to an amazing life of travel and challenge and a lot of freedom. And man, I think that, I think if more people tried to live the way you're living, the world would be a whole lot better place. And I think we'd certainly feel a lot more connection to where we live and who we live with. So yeah, kudos to you, man. I'm curious, what's next for you and the family? What's on the horizon for you?
Right now we're in Australia till probably September. My world tour stuff starts at the end of July. I got to fly back to California for an event there, the U.S. Open, the big
Mm-hmm.
one. That's the start of our tour. Then we'll jump down to Bells. I'll meet the family here. We'll do Bells Beach in Australia, and then we fly back to California for about a week, and then fly down to El Salvador for our next event, and then from El Salvador up to Malibu, California. So our tour is like condensed into 4 months, and
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be a lot of travel. But the family's coming with me everywhere other than Huntington, just because financially it doesn't make sense to
Mm-hmm.
leave Australia, fly to Huntington, fly back to Australia, to fly back to LA again. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'll do Huntington alone. We have a house in Oceanside, so it's kind of home for me anyways.
Cool.
And yeah, that's kind of it. And just more homeschool with the kids and getting them surf, just fostering their surf stoke. Really, like,
Mm-hmm.
they're into it right now, and I don't want to let them down by not being there. So I'm there,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll go down to the beach again in a couple hours and surf again. Like, the kids doing 2 surfs a day. It's pretty cool. Like, as a dad, like, that's rad, and
That's so
I'll fit
cool.
my surfs in around hers. It's cool. Like, I don't mind. I'm happy.
Yeah. Man, that's so cool. And I can't help but think of like the homeschooling aspect of it too, where it's like, so they have this traveling classroom. They're going to go to El Salvador and Southern California and all over the world. And that's where school is as well. So that's such a cool concept.
Yeah, it's
Well,
fun. It's really fun. Like, it's just, I don't know, like, and for us too, like, as parents, like, I'm enjoying learning about these different cultures that we travel to, and
mm-hmm.
I'm enjoying, like, I'm learning with the kids, like I said, I didn't pay that much attention in school from 13 on. So there's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of things that I probably didn't really get. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife was really, academic, and she's super dialed in on all that stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
for me, I feel like I'm kind of learning along the way with my 10-year-old, like, stuff I just skipped over or was surfing when we went through it in school or whatever it may have been,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's just cool to learn with your kid. It's
Mm-hmm.
really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly. I am with that with my 4-year-old right now, where one, it's highlighted how little I knew about certain topics, and I'm like, wow, let's learn about this together. I
Totally.
know nothing about this.
Totally.
But then it's also cool to get to like share that. Like, actually, Dad kind of knows quite a bit about this topic. Like, let's riff on this. Like, space was a big one for my son. Like, I happened to nerd out on some space stuff, and I'm amazed with how quickly it stuck with him. He'd be like, oh, let's go see Orion, and like, let's go see these stars in the sky. Like, what's Venus do? And it was just like I'm like, oh, this is so cool. Yeah.
That's so crazy, right? The stuff that like you'll tell the kids once, and somehow it's like imprinted in their brain, and they'll pull it out like 3 months later, and like, oh, this is da 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 da, and you're like, wait, what? How do you remember that?
Exactly.
Like my 4-year-old does stuff. She remembers stuff from when she was 2. Like places we went. She's like, I remember we went there when, and they'll like rip off what we did like that day. And I'm like, how do you remember what happened 2 years ago when you were 2 years old in some foreign country, but you saw the picture and it immediately like clicked in this whole chain of events that we did. It's just, kids are just amazing.
Oh man, amazing. Yeah. I think that's like, I know it's cliche, but it's like, they really are teaching us probably more than we ever could to teach them. And that's, I think, one of the most fun things about being a dad is like, you're that, fresh learner, fresh perspective, everything's new and exciting again, and just leaning into that as much as we can.
Yeah, 100%.
Awesome. Well, I just want to say thanks so much again for the time. This has been such a great conversation.
Thank you.
I'm curious if you had to leave people with any one thing, like, is there anything that comes to mind that either we said that you want to highlight, or anything that you maybe didn't get to that you want to touch on? Like any last words you think?
I would just go back to that. Acknowledge your successes as well as your defeats. I think it's important as a parent to acknowledge when you do something right. Mm-hmm. And don't just focus on your faults or the mistakes that you make. That's really it. I mean, yeah, it's helped me a lot in getting through the toughest moments, and just, picking out the little things that you do right and acknowledging them. I think that goes a long way with keeping the wheels moving and not getting stuck in a rut somewhere along the way.
This has been an episode of the Athlete Dad Podcast. As always, we'd really love your support in helping to get this podcast out into the world. You can do that by sharing it with somebody you care about who you think would really appreciate the content of what we talk about. You can also like and review on all podcast platforms. So go give us some love. It's much appreciated, and it certainly helps us out keeping the show going. It's also important that you give us a follow on Instagram at The Athlete Dad. You can get all the access to all the pictures and content and more from the podcast that we talk about. And of course, I'm a visual person, so I love what we get to share on Instagram, and it keeps you up to date on all the things happening with the podcast. So go give us a follow on Instagram, and actually all other socials, at The Athlete Dad. If you want exclusive access to content that we do not share publicly on the podcast or socials themselves, you're going to want to sign up for our email list. Go to theathletedad.com, sign up for the email list, become one of our exclusive subscribers, and you'll get access to things like more bonus episodes, deeper dives, other content that we just don't release to the public, things that I think if you really enjoy this topic, you're going to love, because we just get much more into the weeds on all of these things. So go to theathletedad.com, sign up for our email list, and grab yourself some of that exclusive content.